So it's the first day of our journey from Taos down to the southern end of the New Mexico backcountry discovery route. We left the Airbnb where we stayed last night and got all packed up, went to the storage units where we were stowing the tow vehicles, and got those squared away and got the bikes loaded up. It took a little while, so we're going to feel secure about the tow vehicles. Let me give you an overview of the New Mexico backcountry discovery route. We met in Taos, New Mexico. Then we rode south to just outside of Roswell, where we spent our first night in our transfer from Taos to the BDR, 288 miles the first day. And then the following day, we rode 97 miles to join the BDR at Queen. Middle of that day, we began our backcountry discovery route adventure. We rode north and spent the night at Cloudcroft. 165 miles of BDR riding that day. The second day of the BDR, we rode north, camped on rangeland. 130 miles completed that day. The third day, we rode west, then we rode south along the Jornada del Muerto, or Highway of Death, along White Sands Missile Range. We rode by Elephant Butte, Truth or Consequences, and we camped in Chloride Canyon near Winston. 180 miles completed on the third day of the BDR. The fourth day of the BDR, we rode west, almost to the Arizona border, 140 miles that day. The fifth day, we got up and rode through beautiful rangeland. We made it to Grants, New Mexico, 195 miles on the fifth day. The sixth day, we were going to ride to Cuba on the BDR, but about here, we had an adventure that forced us off the trail. We rode pavement out into Cuba, 121 miles on the sixth day. Our last day on the BDR, we rode 100 miles to El Rito, and then we got off the BDR and rode 70 miles back to Taos. The NMBDR that we rode 1,031 miles on the BDR and 1,389 miles total on our trip, including the pavement transfers. So we're south of Taos. It's a beautiful mountain country here. You know, thinking about this trip, we're really thinking about all the dirt roads and wilderness adventures we'd be having. But this is a nice start to our journey south, because this is it's a fun, curvy road through beautiful scenery, easy to ride, helps us get used to the feel of the bike with all the gear packed on. Toward the end of our first day of riding, we made it to Roswell, New Mexico, where Mike, ever the social butterfly, made some new friends. I'm very happy to report there were no alien abductions. That night we camped at Bottomless Lake State Park. So we left this morning from Roswell at our campground at Bottomless Lake State Park and came down to Artesia and then to Seven Lakes. And now we're on the Queen Highway going to the little town of Queen. So we're actually going to start or catch the trail a little bit north of Del City. We kind of looked at the map and decided that Del City, there's supposed to have some very nice people there, but we decided that part of the route was not the most interesting part of the route, so we're going to catch the trail near Queen and then head north. Here we are at Queen, which is our jump-off point for joining the NMBDR. we're at the trailhead, getting ready to start our first leg, first adventure, first part of the North New Mexico backcountry discovery route. Michael's ready, I'm ready. Let's see if the trail's ready for us. Here we go. I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk about some of the points of interest, details that some people have expressed curiosity about. We stored the cars at a regular self-service storage place in Taos, the kind of place where you can rent a little garage. We stored the trailers and the van in the parking area, and in that way it was locked and secure, and we didn't have to worry about it while we were gone. And then we ended our ride by coming back to that area. One of the big constraints or logistical issues every day was making sure that we were going to have enough fuel for the day. We took every opportunity to refill our tanks, even when we maybe had only gone 50 miles. We always topped up the tanks, and we found that actually we never had any fuel anxieties. We did encounter a few gas stations that we thought were going to be open that weren't, but we had, because of our compulsiveness about topping up our tanks, we were fine. Regarding the time of year for the NMBDR, we rode in late May and early June, and I'm so glad we didn't ride any later than that. It was very hot, very dry, very dusty. There's always a concern that were we going to have enough water. I would not want to ride this route in later June, July, August. This is how we start our day. The temperatures ranged from mid-90s during the day to as low as high 30s at night. Because of the dusty conditions, the person in second position would often be engulfed in the cloud of dust. The strategy around that would be for the second person to hang back and ride, maybe more than a quarter of a mile behind the one in front. And that worked sometimes, but it was great to be near the person who was leading, because you could see the lessons, what they'd encountered, and you knew kind of where to go. New Mexico is a very desolate area. As you can see from the video here, there's just a lot of open land without any signs of buildings. Sometimes just not even any cows for, sometimes hours. You wouldn't see any other large mammal anywhere. It's a very remote place, so you have to be prepared to self-support for any eventuality there. The gear, in regards to that, we always made sure we had plenty of water and food and shelter. We did take spares, not a lot of spares, but some nuts and bolts and zip ties and things like that. We were able to plug a tire or put a tube in if we had to. When you add all that gear up and all your camping gear and your clothes and food and everything, my gear just came up to close to 50 pounds. That's a lot of weight on a bike, especially when you're riding off-road. It's something to consider. When I backpack, I typically am about 25 pounds, so the extra gear was more water, more food for multiple days, and then tools and equipment that we might need if we got into a jam. One very nice thing that Michael and I figured out as we started the trip were the communication systems between our helmets. That, for me, was a real benefit. I enjoyed being able to talk to Michael about things we were seeing as we were going by them, or ask for directions. We could consult and discuss things along the way without having to stop and pull over and take our helmets off. So having a bike intercom in an adventure like this, I think it's a real luxury, maybe even almost a necessity. You do need a reliable bike and a bike with a sufficient fuel range to get through the sections every day with a good cushion. Things that happen to the bikes. The electronics, my phone for some reason went dead for several days and then it woke up. I don't have any explanation for that. That was annoying. Michael had a problem with his front brake lever reservoir. It had leaked. At first we thought that the front fork was leaking because it was wet around the top of the fork. But it turned out that it was really the brake reservoir, and he rode to the end of the trip without having any problems with his front brakes, and so that was good. I found a nail in my rear tire, but fortunately it was just in the lugs. The question was whether to pull it out and maybe risk opening up a leak where the nail had penetrated the tire, but the nail was keeping the air in. So we got to Grant, so I pulled the nail out and discovered the nail was kind of in a slanting angle, just in the knobs on the tire. So that was not a problem. My Garmin GPS would sometimes defer to battery power and run out and therefore not work. And lastly, my bike, all the windshield screws to hold the windshield on eventually worked their way out. We had to tie the windshield on with zip ties. When I returned home, I discovered that my kickstand bolt was about to fall out, even though it was Loctited in and torqued properly.
So this is our day where we probably encounter our first sand, and this road so far, a lot of washboard. You can probably hear it in my voice. There's a little sand right here, but certainly manageable at the moment. When I stand up, it gives me a little bit smoother ride. The bike's still absorbing all the washboard, but my body is not when I stand. My legs absorb it, I guess. So there's moments of hard pack and the moments of soft sand, kind of like this.
This road was done the third day of our trip and was roughly 90 miles. We completed in about 3 or 4 hours.
All good. It's deep sand and what happens is the sand just kind of starts to deflect the tire, and you can see there are ruts there, and sometimes the ruts just throw the front fork to one direction. If you review the video, you'll see that I got slower and slower, and the engine seemed to be bogging down. And I actually think that traction control worked against me in this particular situation. So it may be a good idea to turn down or turn off the traction control in sand. It was here that I sprained my right thumb, and that bothered me even for several weeks after the trip. You'll see here that Michael has his foot buried in the sand to give you an idea of how deep it was. Okay, well, had my first full immersion experience with sand, and did okay. It was not going too fast, and of course the sand, that's the part of the problem with the sand, is trying to hold you back and slow you down, and so as you start to fall, at least in my case, it just seemed like everything was sort of in slow motion. But anyway, don't want to do it again, but it's probably good to have that experience. For many motorcyclists, the spills and mishaps actually happen at zero speed or very low speed. In this particular case, Michael had stopped and was enjoying the view, and then he put his foot down to steady the bike, but he put it down in a pothole, and then he developed momentum, and the bike just started to lean, and then the bike fell down. And this was a case, as Michael said, of too much throttle. Here, Fred fell on a downhill section where we unexpectedly encountered some large gravel. Riding through White Sands Missile Range, we came across some interesting artifacts from the region. An unexpected pleasure of the trip were the number of large animal encounters that we had. Interestingly, we encountered no snakes on this trip. I got it. And I got it on video. These are pronghorn antelope. They are large, powerful animals, very muscular. Well, that was exciting. Nearly all the land along the BDR is open range, and the animals seem to be able to roam wherever they wish. Gosh, no fence or anything. There they go. And here we encounter mule deer. Look at these right here on the left. Oh, this is great. Our last full day on the trail turned out to be the section from Grants to Cuba. 121 miles, very desolate, very remote, with challenging roads and sand. As we began the day, everything was nice and clear. But going back and looking at the video, I now see there were some clouds in the sky that would be a portent of things to come. Feeling a few raindrops with some dark clouds. Really hoping we don't get much, because that would be a real mess on these roads. Probably get really slick. Got some dark clouds up above and riding through some hail right now. Not a lot, but it's an interesting experience in the desert with a little hail coming down. Here were hard packed, but with a fine layer of silt on top, maybe a half inch. When that got wet, that became very slippery. You can hear the hail hit the helmet, and the mic, and the microphone. Right on the edge of the storm, blue sky to the west, clouds and rain and hail to the north. Here, the silt is turned into basically slimy grease. Doing a lot of slipping. Seems like we're right on the edge of the weather here. And it seems like the wind's blowing it away from our route, as far as we can tell. Part of us wants to see if we can't ride out of it, but it is getting quite slippery. So it's moment by moment whether to keep going. At this point, the GoPro got a little damp and stopped working. So the rest of the documentation is my iPhone photos. We came to the bottom of a steep hill, and we knew we would not be able to get up the hill on our motorcycles at that point. We parked the bikes and put a tarp across them to create a little shelter between them, and we waited out the storm. Hail collected on the ground and on the tarp, filling up the deep areas. The temperature dropped about 20 degrees. After a while, the rain and hail stopped, and when the hill was somewhat drier, Michael and I attempted to climb the hill, which is very difficult because each footstep went down 2 or 3 inches. We eventually made it to the top of the hill, and in the distance, we could see that the storm was to the north and east, but also that there was what appeared to be a white truck in the distance. Michael decided to hike to see if there was anybody there, to see if they would have any information or assistance for us.
After a while, Mike came back in the truck, and the man was somebody who worked at Los Alamos, was scouting the area for a planned Continental Divide Trail hike next year. And he basically said that if we would just give it a little time, we'd probably be able to ride out, but we still had the storm to contend with. He told us that there was a shortcut off the trail, off the dirt trail to pavement, but we had to get there before the storm returned to the area. Michael went up the hill first. He had no difficulty. I followed, and then we did some very, very fast desert riding along the edge of the storm for about 20 miles until we found pavement. And then from there, we rode very quickly into Cuba. That night we stayed at the Cuban Lodge, one of the premier accommodations in that town. The photo does not do it justice. The next morning, as we were leaving Cuba, we came across a gem of a coffee stand on the side of the road, Juicy Jitters, a truly unique spot where we lingered to enjoy some morning coffee. Soon after leaving the coffee shop, we encountered some low-lying fog, probably a unique experience in New Mexico. Next, we made a brief stop at Abiquiu, and then we went on to El Rito, where we found the Mars Polar Lander, lost since 1999. Shortly after this, we arrived again at dirt roads and found that they were muddy and mostly impassable because of the rain the previous day. So we decided that we'd had a great trip and we headed towards Taos. Back in Taos, we did a quick cleanup of our bikes and enjoyed a last evening together. Next morning, Michael arose early and headed east. Fred stayed in Taos for a couple of days and then met his wife in Albuquerque for a celebratory rendezvous. All in all, this was the adventure of a lifetime. Spectacular scenery, thrilling adventures, and wonderful friendship.